Greetings from Tokyo. This is Daisuke Beppu, and I hope you are doing very well today. My friends, today is a very special day, for I would like to take this opportunity to talk about a very special film and a very interesting film. That film is from the Criterion collection, Spine number 43, from 1963, directed by Peter Brook. It is the film of Lord of the Flies. So today is a very special day because I have been very kindly invited by Adam at his channel Mementomori to give some comments about the film Lord of the Flies. Now, Lord of the Flies is a film that is an adaptation of the very, very famous novel that was written by Mr. William Golding. Mementomori has a really great series that is now ongoing called BOOK2FILM. In this series, Adam has a really interesting take on certain films and books. Now, what he does in this series is that he takes certain books, and he talks about the book, and then he also talks about the film adaptation that came after the book. So I think, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think as of now, he spoke about The Night of the Hunter, and also he spoke about Children of Men, and this month is Lord of the Flies. And if you look on his page, you'll find a really interesting year-long syllabus. And he will be covering a book and a film once a month. Now, my understanding is that it is going to be the last Thursday of every month. So if you want to prepare for the next one, you can do so and be caught up by the time he posts his video. It's really interesting. And so what I will do is, once his video for Lord of the Flies is up, I will provide a link below, and I strongly, strongly, strongly encourage you to take a look at it. I'm looking forward to it very much. So this is a really wonderful opportunity. So Adam, if you're watching, I want to say thank you so much, and I look forward to our continuing conversations and discussions. My dear friend, one of these days you and I will meet, and we will share a drink, and I'll buy you a meal, and we can talk about literature and cinema and life and everything in between. I'm so looking forward to meeting you. So let me now talk about the film Lord of the Flies. What I will do is I'll just provide a bit of general comments first that are without any spoilers, and then after that, perhaps, if you'll permit me, I will make it clear. I'll put some kind of title card or something up, and then I will indicate the section where I will then talk about spoilers, if you don't mind. I think it's really important that we talk as much detail as possible about this film. And if you have any questions or any comments or any disagreements even, please don't hesitate to let me know. You can leave a comment, or if you want to try to find me on Facebook, you can look my name up and send me a private message or something to that nature. I'm perfectly fine with receiving those messages. Anyway, without further ado, let me now talk very briefly about my general comments for the film Lord of the Flies. Now I'd like to talk about Lord of the Flies. So this is a film that is directed by Peter Brook, released in 1963. This is the film that is the adaptation of the very famous novel by William Golding. And I guess the general comment that I'd like to make about this film is that it is a really remarkable film, I think. It is a remarkable film in the sense that it is deceptive. And I mean that in the most sincere, earnest, and complimentary way I can. And what I mean by deceptive is this. It's a film that's black and white, and it's a film that is very rough around the edges. Now, when I say rough around the edges, I mean that it's shot on location, and you have these boys that are, for the most part, not professional actors. So they are all amateurs, but that's a really great asset to the film, and I'll talk about that later. And they're all assembled on this real island, and so the filming is actually on location, so there are no sets or any Hollywood sets or anything of that nature. So there is no sense of theatricality to this film. Everything seems very roughly shot. There's a lot of handheld stuff. The sound and the dialogue is very obviously dubbed over the image, so that you have this very harsh, thick, echoey quality to the voices and to the sounds and to the dialogue, which is obviously separate from the image, if you know what I mean. So there's a real patchwork or rough quality to the making of this film. And I think that serves very well, and it really gives the film a real punch, and it really is to the film's advantage that it looks this way, and it's deceptively rough and simple. And what I mean by that is this. At least from my point of view, when you're looking at a film like this, it seems like a photorealistic documentary. And I know it's not, and I know that there are certain scenes that are obviously staged, but the style of the film, the look of the film, the environment of the film, if you like, lends itself very nicely to this photorealistic documentary style. And it's like a nature video almost. You're out in the wild and you're taking this film, and then when you do that, the sound is not always in sync, and it's a bit rough, and you're not always thinking about the beauty of the frame necessarily, but you're just interested in trying to capture what it is that you're trying to capture in nature. Well, that's what it feels like here. You have the filmmaker trying to capture this scenario of these young boys stranded on this island. Okay. And I think that adds a real element of just a disturbing quality, a real shocking quality, a thought-provoking quality, because that layer of theatricality is gone between you and the film. And if the layer of theatricality is gone, then what you're left with is just the horror of the images that you're watching. And I think that is potentially quite an intense viewing experience for the viewer, at least for me. So that's one aspect of why I think its deceptive nature is to its advantage. The other aspect of why I think its deceptive nature is to its advantage is because, how should I put it? It feels almost amateurish. And it feels almost like, not always, but sometimes, it feels like maybe like a student film, or it feels like a film that is maybe very amateurishly put together. Now, I mean that in the most complimentary way I can, because I know it's a stylistic choice on the part of the director to do this. The reason why that approach is really effective, though, is that it lulls the viewer, or at least it lulls me, into a false sense of security. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that when I watch a film that seems amateurish or seems maybe of lesser quality, quote unquote, then I feel like I have something over the film. I feel like I'm in control. I know what the film is more or less about. I don't think the film is going to be challenging or thought-provoking. I think it's probably going to be amateurish and therefore not skilled enough to provoke me. And that's great, because that gives me maybe a false sense of security, maybe a sense of superiority, if you like, over the film. And that is to the film's advantage, because once the film lulls me into that sense of security, it then develops its story in a way that, as you know, is disturbing and shocking and quite suddenly quite revolting and horrifying. And the way it builds is so magnificent. You are in this false sense of security, and then boom, you are confronted with some horror. And then boom, you're confronted with even more horror, and then even more horror. Such that by the end, you are just left as a viewer feeling shocked and stunned, and you realize that the film when I watched the film, and I watched the film all the way through, and I reached the end, I knew that the film really played me. It really took me around, and it really played me. It was so deceptive, and it was so simplistic at the beginning, but then it just hit me with a shock and a stunner, and then even more so. And then the blood and the horror just came tumbling down. And so I was left completely vulnerable as a viewer. And then I was just at the mercy of the film in the final 10 minutes of the film, which is exactly what a great film does. So that is why I think the film is deceptive in a great way. And that is the sign of a really sharp film. It is a sign of a really smart filmmaker. And it is a sign of a smart filmmaker who knows what he is trying to accomplish with this film. And that is Peter Brook. And what he is trying to accomplish with the film Lord of the Flies is something that is going to shock the audience, something that is going to really provoke and challenge the audience. And this film does so. Lord of the Flies. Now, I'd like to talk about very specific aspects of the film. I'm going to be speaking about spoilers. So if you have not read the book, or if you have not seen the film, please do not continue on with this video. I don't want to give away details that will ruin your experience of reading the story or watching the film for the first time, because I think one of the great delights of this film is its ability to surprise and shock. So if you're still here, then that means you know what the story is. Okay. So, just a few comments, actually. The Lord of the Flies as a film is an adaptation of the novel, of course. And there are some very interesting dynamics already at play between with this film with respect to its status as an adaptation of the novel. First of all, the novel is very famous. William Golding's novel is a masterpiece, in my opinion. And it's not my own opinion. I think it's highly regarded. And it's, I think, a book that is widely read in U.S. high schools. I read it when I was in high school. And I read it many times because I thought it was a really shocking work. So you have this film, which was made, maybe some not 10 years later after the book was originally published. And so the first question one asks is, how does it fare as an adaptation of this very famous novel? And I must say, pretty good. It's not an absolute word-for-word faithful adaptation of the novel, but it is fairly close, I would say. Fairly close. The arc of the film, the trajectory of the film from beginning to end, well, after the credits anyway, from beginning to the end, to the very last shot, I think follows the trajectory of the novel very faithfully. And I think that's really good, because the trajectory of the novel is a really good one. And I think to follow that good trajectory is a wise move on the part of the filmmakers. So then the question is, is it a good adaptation? In other words, what parts of the film does the film do well in adapting as an adaptation of the book, and what parts of the film are lacking? And I think one way to approach it is to speak to ways in which the book and the film are different. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I will say that there are differences between the book and the film. So, for example, I think the film tends to simplify the characterization of Simon. In other words, the film doesn't necessarily go into Simon's maybe inner mysticism or mystical qualities. It doesn't really delve into Simon's the potential there is for Simon. Maybe he is ill. There is a suggestion in the novel that he has epilepsy, I think. And I don't think that's at all touched in the film. The trajectory of Simon as a character in terms of his narrative is intact. He has certain insights about what's going on. There is the very famous scene about him witnessing the hunting of a certain boar, and then the head is on the stick, and he sees the head, and you see him look straight into the eyes of the head. But unlike the book, there is no dialogue with the head. There is no indication that he considers the head to be Beelzebub. So there is nothing of that nature. There is just a simple shot of Simon's face close up, and then the boar's head on the stick close up, with the flies, the carrion flying around. The essence remains intact. So therefore, you have his unfortunate demise at the hands of the group after they perform their ritualistic dance, and they mistake him for the beast, apparently, and then he dies. Murdered, as Ralph would describe it the next day. So that is, on the one hand, a similarity, but on the other hand, it's a difference. So it doesn't go quite into the same detail as the book does in terms of Simon's characterization. And also the same is true for other characters as well. For example, maybe Roger, the character of Roger is not you don't necessarily get a sense of the progression of, or the development, or the digression, or the de-evolution, perhaps, from the start of his character at the beginning to the end, where he is a very violent and sadistic person. You don't really get that sense of transformation in the film as you do in the book. Also, there are other differences. In other words, there are other aspects of the film that are not in the book itself. So there are some liberties that the filmmakers take with respect to the subject matter. I think some of the examples that come to mind immediately are, for example, the introductory sequence where you have the photographs of the children in the school, and then you see some of them performing in the choir, and they're all photographs and zooming in. And this is all, I think, in the background as the opening titles progress. And then you suddenly see planes and sounds of bombs and things of that nature. So you realize that these children are maybe being evacuated from England, or maybe from the school to another place, and then suddenly there is and these are still in photograph form, and then you see the photographs manipulated in a way to suggest the plane being hit, and the assumption being that the children are on this plane, and then the photographs are further manipulated in a way to suggest a crash. And then you have the start of the film, which is the start of the novel. We don't get this introductory background material in the novel. As you recall, when we start with chapter 1, we are straight into the aftermath of this crash and these children who are stranded. Oh yes, there is no birthmark boy in the film. I think there's a birthmark boy that's in the book, a boy with a birthmark, and he is significant because I think he is the first boy in the book anyway to die, and we don't get him in the film, and I think therefore, yes, the idea of death and these children doesn't come until later. When you have the second half of the film, and you have the children and Simon, and then later with Piggy, and then the final confrontation between the tribe now, and their hunting down of Ralph. So there's that difference. Also, there is a really great scene, I think, that's added to the film that does not appear in the novel, I think. And it's this. It's the scene after Simon has been killed. Now, if you recall in the book, after the death of Simon, we have this really poignant scene between Piggy and Ralph, where I think it is Piggy who is trying to disown the fact that what happened to Simon the previous night was akin to murder. Now, Ralph seems to be very willing to accept responsibility for his part in the death of Simon, but Piggy seems to not want to accept such responsibility. And I think that's a really interesting scene, and a very powerful scene, and an important scene in the context of the story. But what's really interesting about the way the film deals with that scene, if you recall, is that before the film that scene starts, we have a shot of Piggy urinating, and you don't actually see it, but you see kind of him from behind, and you hear the sound of urination. And I think that's a really, really interesting choice on the part of the filmmakers, because it suggests, on the one hand, it's kind of a childlike innocence on the part of Piggy, but on the other hand, there's a little bit of kind of a disgust to his character. We've just seen Simon, and the shot of him, his body floating almost angelically in this very peaceful-looking water, and then cuts to black, and then the next thing we hear is someone urinating, which is Piggy, which seems to suggest almost a sign of disrespect on the part of Piggy after the death of Simon, but also seems to suggest, in a very strange way, a kind of cleansing of the body. And then it's really interesting that after that, Piggy has his discussion with Ralph, and it's quite an amazing scene, because for the first time, we as viewers really don't like we don't like Piggy, because he seems to not want to accept responsibility for the death of Simon. So he doesn't seem to be a very sympathetic character at that point in time. So, and also it's really symbolic, because he seems to be trying to cleanse himself of any guilt that he might otherwise have. So that scene with him urinating is actually quite a profound moment. And I think it really serves to add a real interesting dynamic between film adaptation and the source novel. Speaking of Piggy, there's another great scene that's not in the novel. And it's a scene where he is sitting with some boys on the beach, and he's talking about, Camberley? And he's talking about, this town of Camberley, and what's it about, and it's just him and the boys, and he's just sitting there, and the camera slowly zooms from his face outwards as he's just talking, and I think it's just one take. And if I recall from the commentary that's available on the Criterion Collection release, I believe that the filmmakers indicated on the commentary that that was the only scene that the sound is actually the actual recorded sound. Every other scene has the sound dubbed over later, but that scene with Ralph describing, I think, Camberley, is a really nice scene because it's so sincere and it's so real, and it's made even more real by the fact that you're actually hearing his voice as he talks. And so it's a nice tender moment, and it just adds to the sympathetic nature of Piggy. So those are just some examples of differences between the book and the film. And so therefore the question, I think, at least in my mind, is, how does the film fare as an adaptation? And I think the answer is it is quite a successful one, because it does a lot of things right. And I think one of the major things that it does right is that it gets the kids right. The Ralph is so, I think he's kind of he's a bit of how should I put it? He seems upright, but he seems a bit too proud, if you know what I mean. He seems a bit too clean cut and proud. So that it's really nice to see that that complexity of his character expressed visually in terms of the performance. And the same is true of Jack. Jack is very tall, and he's very physical and very loud, and that is very, I think, suggestive of Jack's character, and very emblematic of his character, at least as it's portrayed in the novel as well. But he also has moments of real regret, and there is a sympathetic look to his eyes that makes him almost likable. One of the great moments of the film, if you recall, is right after Piggy is killed by Roger, after Roger throws the stone over. There's a shot of Jack's face, and he's looking down from the top, and there's a real look of shock and just bewilderment almost, and almost akin to guilt, which is an amazing moment because it really helps to augment the complexity of the character of Jack. He's not a fully 100% bad guy. He's quite unlikable in places, but he's not a bad guy. And so just seeing his performance in this film just makes that point all the more clearer, if you know what I mean. And then there's Piggy. My goodness, Piggy is such a great this is such a great performance because, oh gosh, I love this performance so much because he is at once the voice of reason, and there's just this way in which he speaks that is it sometimes gets on my nerves, and I think that's on purpose. And I don't mean that I don't mean to insult the performance of the actor, because I think that is a real benefit to the film, because Piggy should be a character that is that expresses pearls of wisdom, but at the same time does it in a way that is potentially quite aggravating. Ralph is sometimes annoyed by Piggy. Jack certainly is. So why shouldn't we, the audience, feel that way as well? And I think that really creates this wonderful sense of tension, which is not it doesn't, it's not direct, but it's subtle, and it's provided through the performance. And it's a real wonderful thing. And it just adds, just another layer of complexity to the story and the fact that no one is necessarily completely good or completely bad. There is some real nuance here. I guess I should say one more thing, which is this. What I like about the film too is that it doesn't seem to want to be content with just being quote unquote a film adaptation. You know, because the phrase film adaptation is potentially quite a, maybe it has the potential for being a bit derogatory towards the film. And what I mean is, you have the phrase film adaptation, and what that suggests is that there is a source novel. And therefore, the source novel, perhaps because it's the source of the story, automatically takes precedence or has more importance or is more elevated than the film adaptation, you know, because the film adaptation is a derivative work from the source novel. And I understand that frame of thinking very well, and I think that for the most part, at least as far as my views of other film adaptations of novels are concerned, I think for the most part that dynamic stands. In other words, the source material is, for lack of a better phrase, maybe of higher quality or maybe a little bit superior to the derivative work that follows, which is the film adaptation. But that is the real interesting thing about considerations of film adaptations, is it not? Because once in a while you see a film that struggles and sometimes even succeeds to break free from this dichotomy and break free in a way that the film establishes its own character, its own existence, and its own importance and relevance in terms of story. And I think Lord of the Flies, while I see the argument that some people might make that this is purely a film adaptation of a great novel, I think the counter-argument can be made that Lord of the Flies is indeed one that breaks free from the shadow of its source novel counterpart, and it does so in a way that is quite illuminating and exciting. And maybe some support that I might cite for such an argument would be things that I've already mentioned, which are certain scenes that the film employs that are not in the novel, that give the film a certain sense of life and a certain sense of energy and a real interesting take on the nature of these children, for example, with respect to Piggy. And so therefore, the film seems to struggle and seems to be in this maybe constant effort, if you will, of trying to be its own thing. And I really love that. I love that sense of dynamism, that tension between the source novel and the film. I remember when I saw this again, maybe a month or so back in preparation for this, I was really frightened by some of the shots in this, and I was really just amazed actually about how little violence is depicted on the screen. Right? You don't see any pigs getting penetrated. You don't see any cutting of the heads or anything. You don't see it. You don't see the Simon getting violently battered. You don't see the impact directly anyway of the stone against Piggy. You see glimpses of it, but it's done in a very it's done in a way that is all suggestive, and it implies all the violence rather than makes it explicit. And I think that is really a testament to the fact that Peter Brook is an amazing filmmaker, and he really has ways to suggest the horrible nature of the situation rather than explicitly show it. And I think in the long run, that method of filmmaking is much more terrifying and much more memorable, and has the potential of aging with much more grace and nobility. So that is my general impression of the film Lord of the Flies. I'm sorry if this was a very meandering video. It's not an easy film to discuss by any means, and I think the film is challenging and provoking, and it's quite unpleasant sometimes, but that is all to serve the purpose of the book. The purpose of the story, which is to show this breakdown of law and order into chaos and disorder. And what a more frightening, is there a more frightening way to display such a story and such a fable than to set it in the context of children killing each other? I don't know. Anyway, that's it from me. And so if you have any questions or comments or criticisms of anything that I've said, please feel free to let me know. You can leave a comment below, or you can try to reach me on Facebook. I'm very happy to discuss and engage. And if you want to ask me questions, I'm very happy to answer to the best of my ability. So yes, so that's it. So once again, I'd like to thank Adam at mementomori, the great YouTube channel. If you are watching this video and you haven't seen his YouTube channel, I encourage you to go to his channel. His channel is about books and literature, and he has such a wonderful way of describing what he likes and what he doesn't like. And I just love that he is so earnest, and when everything he says is from the heart and you know it. And I wish he made a video a day, because I think I would just be so much I would be such a happier person if I were able to see a video a day from him. He is so erudite and so intelligent, but he doesn't show it. He's got that wonderful uncanny ability of being so smart and yet not letting that overpower his presentation. In other words, he's so down to earth because he is, and he's such a likable personality, but yet he is so filled with knowledge, and it's just a wonderful combination. Very rare. So I encourage you to watch his videos and to subscribe to his channel and to read some of the books that he recommends and to watch some of the films that he also recommends. I know that he also talks about films, and he does so in a very great way, and not least of which being his great series BOOK2FILM. So yes, so I encourage you to look at Memento Mori. And with that, I would like to say thank you very much for watching, and I hope all of you have a really, really great rest of your day. Cheers.